We are in this series, and we have loved it. It's all about reaching the one at a time. So in 1952, Everett flew from Chicago to Korea. Right at the height of the Korean War, and he went to Korea with the intention of preaching the gospel of Jesus. It was winter, it was super cold, and when he landed, what he did is what any of us do when we get off an airplane, whether it's 1952 or today, he got something to eat. Okay? And he found a little alcove and he sat down and he got ready to eat and he took his coat off. And as soon as he laid his coat down, a child came and stole his coat. It's 1952. He's a missionary. He doesn't have money to buy another coat. So he chases the child in and out, down alleys, all this way. He's not going to give up this coat. He just flew from Chicago to Korea. He finally gets into this opening, and he sees so many coats on the ground, and also a whole bunch of children. And he's like, this is a racket. These kids are just stealing coats. And he sees his coat. And he goes to pick up his coat, and when he picks up his coat, underneath it, he sees not one child, but several. All those coats laying on the ground were being used as covers for children that were freezing. He was struck by so much compassion that he went out and he got soup, and he brought back soup for as many as he could. And then he had to go for the night. He went and he spent the night, and he thought, I'm going to go back the next morning and just check on the children. When he got back there, he noticed that there were soldiers also there checking on the children. And at first he thought, this is great. There are soldiers that have figured out that these kids are here. But the soldiers weren't there to help the children. They also weren't there to harass the children. The soldiers were checking underneath the coats for who had died through the night. And they were taking the children that had passed away and putting them on trucks. And it crushed Everett. So after his few weeks there, he's flying on the way home to Chicago, and the entire plane ride home, he's thinking, what can I do for these children? And he has no idea. And as soon as he lands, he just pours his heart out to a businessman, the first person that he sees, and he just tells him what's happening. And this man writes a check to Everett for $1,000. In today's money, $1,000 in 1952 is the equivalent of $11,352 today. And Everett took every dime of that, and he wrote checks and created supplies. And it was the start of this, Compassion International. If you've never heard of it, I'd encourage you to check out their website. On their website, you can read about Everett Swanson. And you can read this amazing summary statement. Serving more than 2.2 million children with over 8,000 frontline churches for 70 years in Jesus' name. There's a reason that every human feels compassion. The problem is with compassion that if it stays in us as a feeling, it's useless. We all have compassion, don't we? We all feel it. It's this knot in our stomach. Oh, What can we do? It's that ping in our heart, like somebody should do something about that. We've all felt it. A couple of years ago, I was in Knoxville for a medical treatment. I was by myself, had an Airbnb, and I got a fever. Now, I don't know if as an adult you've had a fever, but it's way worse than when you had one as a child, okay? And it makes you a really horrible human. And I'm by myself, and I'm in an Airbnb, and of course, we got the cheapest Airbnb, so I don't have a bathtub. And I don't know about you, but when I get a fever, I need to be submerged in hot water. And so my brilliant mind decided that I could go to Walmart and get the biggest tote possible. This is a true story. Biggest tote possible and fill it up with boiling water. And then, anyway, so I'm at Walmart and I have a fever and I feel terrible and I look like I feel. And I've got this, I don't think it through. I buy the hugest tote possible, but then I've got to try to figure out how to get it in my car. And I haven't put my seats down, and my head hurts, and I feel bad, and just all the things. So I just want you to imagine what I feel like. And I'm finally driving out of the Walmart parking lot, and I see a woman, probably about my age, with a teenage girl. She looks to be a different ethnicity than me. And she doesn't have like a piece of cardboard or anything. She's just by a van. And she's written on what looks like a piece of paper like this with an ink pen, "Need gas." And I have a fever. Oh. And so there are children here. And if you're the parent, this is awesome. If there are not children in a church, the church is dying. So we should enjoy children every time we see them, okay? So if they distract you, I'm sorry, but I'm going to keep going, okay? So I have a fever. I feel terrible. This woman needs gas. And so I don't know if you've ever done this in your mind. I start telling myself all the reasons why I don't need to help her. You have a fever. Somebody else doesn't have a fever. You don't live in Knoxville. Somebody else lives in Knoxville. Rochelle, you're down here by yourself. It's not safe to stop and help strangers. And then the last one that I told myself, it was like I'd already gotten through the intersection. It was a really hard intersection to get through. These really all went through my mind. But something in me broke when I saw that woman. So I turn around. I go back. I get out. There's a language barrier. The teenage daughter won't make eye contact with me, and it starts to scare me. The mom smells really bad. And I start thinking, I think it's a scam. And then, once we get through the language barrier and she figures out I'm paying to put gas in her van, she starts crying and I start crying. I wish that was a normal story in my life. I wish that story was one of 10,000 stories of the times that I felt compassion and I actually did something about it. But you know why I remember the story? Because it's one of the few times I have. The title of this message is The Power of And. Compassion and action. That's where the magic is. It's in 3 little letters. And. Whether you walked in here today and you are a sold devout Jesus follower, you come to church all the time, or whether you walked in here completely skeptical of what everybody in here believes, or maybe you walked in here disenchanted with church. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Every human on the planet feels compassion. And so this message is for all of us. Now, I have my phone up here today for a reason. The Bible word compassion in the Greek is really hard to say. And I was going to try to say it for you today. And then yesterday I went to my niece's play, and her grandpa was my Greek teacher in Bible college. And as soon as I saw him, I thought, I'm not saying that word on stage. Now, he's not here today, but just know that Mr. Wyndham encouraged excellence, and so you are going to hear the proper way to say the Greek word of compassion.
Strong's G 4697, splachnidzamai. Splachnidzamai.
See why I didn't try that? But that sound in there, it's for the gut-wrenching. That word literally means the movement of the bowels. I know. I hope your breakfast is settled. See, when we feel physically, we don't feel it in our heart. We feel it in our gut. And we know when we're being drawn into action. But we've gotten so good at dismissing it. And so today, we're going to look at Jesus' life and his example. And we're going to hopefully follow in what he has to say. Because he didn't just feel compassion, he showed compassion. And so, here's what I want you to remember before we jump into Jesus' story. In Korea, the kids stole coats. And in Knoxville, that woman was dirty and she smelled. See, people who are unlovely are not unlovely because they're unlovable, but because they're unloved. And there's 3 letters, A-N-D. And love changed their life. So we're going to look today and see how Jesus loved and how he changed people's lives. We're going to be in Mark chapter 1. And we're going to start in verse 40, and it says, a man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees and said, if you're willing, you can make me clean. Now, I want to make sure that you understand what leprosy was. It's so interesting. I'm going to read this directly from a commentary, and I want you to know it's just so true, and it's funny to me. So it's not leprosy, but it's very contagious, and there's no cure. It ate your skin away, and people were considered untouchable. Here's the part that I find funny. And so they made a rule that you had to socially distance from people that were lepers 6 feet away. Everything started in the Bible. Can you imagine having something and no one ever wanting to shake your hand? No one ever wanting to hug you or to touch something that you had touched? Jesus touched this man, and his leprosy went away. And then we go on and it says, moved with compassion. Jesus reached out and touched him. He said, I am willing, be healed. Now, I want to stop here and tell you that most everything that we put up here on the screens is from a version of the Bible called the New International Version. It's just because it's one of the most easily understood and most literal. This verse I actually took from the New Living Translation because this word compassion gets translated a lot of different ways in Scripture. And I want you to see what was happening here in Jesus. He was moved. He felt it. And he said, I am willing, be healed. And instantly the leprosy disappeared and the man was healed. And I think we read this and all of us take this for granted that of course Jesus would heal him. I mean, the Jesus we know, of course, when somebody reaches out and says, heal me, he'd heal him. But I want you to remember that Jesus was completely human, just like us. And he had real life days, and he got tired, and he had an agenda, and he had places he wanted to go. And right before these verses, in Mark chapter 1, verse 40, just right above that, the paragraph above that, we see that Jesus had gone to Simon's house to rest, and his mother-in-law was sick. So Jesus healed her, because that's what Jesus does, right? And then while Jesus is at Simon's house, they start bringing all these people to Jesus to be healed. And right before all of this happens, it says, I'm not going to put it up here. I just want you to listen. Before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up. He went out to an isolated place to pray. And Simon and the others went to find him. And when they found him, they said, hey, Jesus, everyone's looking for you. You got to, speed up this prayer thing. We got people to heal. And Jesus replied, guys, we've got to go to other towns. We've got to go there and I will preach to them. This is why I came. So they started traveling throughout Galilee to all these different synagogues because Jesus is saying, look, yes, I can heal people. That's something I'm capable of doing, but it's not why I'm here. And then right after that, we see he's walking, and this man stops and says, I have leprosy, heal me. And Jesus had to feel the same things we feel. Do you know how much I've already done today? Do you know how many people I have already healed? Do you know how tired I am? I got up to pray this morning. Did you? And the feeling that I feel like he had to have felt, and he didn't say, but we say all the time is, I have something else I'm on my way to do. And it's actually more important. I think we take for granted that Jesus took the time. See, compassion demands our time. Now, the next part, the story feels like it takes a weird turn, but it doesn't. It says, Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. See that you don't tell this to anyone. Don't tell anybody. But do go and show yourself to the priest and offer sacrifices that Moses commanded you for your cleansing as a testimony. So hopefully, because of what I've told you, you already know why he said don't tell anybody. Right? He's on his way to tell people about the love of his Father. He's wanting to preach to people and tell them the good news, and he doesn't want word to get out that he just healed somebody, because what's going to happen? Everybody's going to bring everybody that's sick, right? But then he says, go to the priest. Why go to the priest? Because this man, in that day and age, was not considered clean until the priest said he was. And that meant he couldn't hug his wife. He couldn't be in a home with his children. He couldn't be near his friends. What I find so interesting is that Jesus cared so much about what this man was really missing. See, compassion is connection. It's about connecting at a human level. This is why we've been journeying together for 6 weeks. We very rarely do a series for this long. We've been in this series one at a time because it's the entire thing that Jesus based his whole ministry on was connection. And if I'm honest, this is my weakness. This is the part of the message I wanted to cut out because this is the part I'm bad at. I love a checklist. I can write a check for something that causes me to feel that feeling in my gut. I can make a meal for somebody. You can put me on a serving list. But you can ask even the people I am closest to on the earth, and the thing that I struggle with is letting people in and connecting with people on a one-on-one basis. But that's what compassion calls us to do. No, here's the funny part. The story goes on. I think that if Jesus told me to be quiet, I don't know, I talk a lot, but I think that if Jesus told me to be quiet, I would be. Instead, this guy went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news. And as a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Can we just stop there? The Son of God, Savior of the world, felt lonely too. Yet, the people still came to him from everywhere. We feel that feeling in our gut. We see that person with a sign. We see someone that looks unlovable. And if we get down to the core of who we are, I think that the reason why we don't do the 3 little letters, the A and D, we feel the compassion, but we don't go to action, is because compassion costs us something. When we're compassionate, it's going to cost us. It might cost us money. It will certainly cost us time. But for me, it's when it costs me emotion and disappointment. And when it costs me the fact that I'm in a less desirable situation because I was compassionate. The power of and. Compassion and action. Action definitely costs us. But you know what else does? Regret costs us. Inaction costs us. Guilt costs us. The difference with compassion is that every time it costs us, it's so worth the result. So today, the question for you is, as a human, are you willing to follow Jesus' example? What's breaking your heart? That's the compassion. And sometimes we're so busy. When I ask this question, and I'm going to tell you such truth, when I asked myself this question this week, I don't know, nothing. because I'm busy. But when I break it down, and I don't want you to answer out loud, but maybe you need to write something on your phone or on your heart. When's the last time you thought or you felt or you wished something was better or something could be different for a neighbor, for a coworker, for a family member, for a child, for the elderly? When's the last time you wished something could be different for someone who was sick, for someone who was poor? And what are you going to do about it? Who or what or how do you need to devote more of your time? This week's Thanksgiving. You got plans. How is some of that time going to not be yours? Who needs connection? Now, this is a personal question. Do you need connection with God? Do you need connection with Jesus? Are you ready to take the action for that? And if you have connection, who do you know that doesn't? And how can you be that connection? That song that we sang right before I got up here, how can someone see in your eyes Jesus? And then the last question, what excuse, what reason, or what cost is keeping you from the and? Compassion and action. The power of and.